I want to welcome those of you who are watching online, and my friend Jim was asking a question right before we went on the air about the gap theory, and so we'll answer that and have a word of prayer and get started. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to 1 Chronicles 26. We're going to be studying today the gatekeepers, the judges, the officials of the temple. Jim, your question is about the gap theory in Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, right? Yes. The gap between there.
I just not heard much about it.
Really?
You mentioned it the other day.
Never heard that. How many of y'all have ever heard of the gap theory before? Okay. All right, several of you. The pastors have. Pastor, let me ask you, have you held to the gap theory, or have you taught it, or have you just heard it taught?
I've just heard of it.
Just heard of it. Okay. Well, the gap theory basically says this, that God created the heavens and the earth, which could have included what people call today caveman or ancient man, but not man in the imago Dei, in the image of God. That it was a world of life, of creation, but when the angels fell, when Lucifer and a third of the angels fell, then God destroyed what He had created. This is between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And then God recreated what was formless and void. And when He recreated or created Adam, man, He made man in His image. So that's Adam and Eve. And so the gap theory, they don't care if you say the world's billions and billions and billions of years old, because in their mind, the world begins in Genesis 1:2 when Adam is created. Does that make sense, Jim? That's the gap theory. Today's lesson is from 1 Chronicles chapter 26. So we're going to read the text here in just a moment. Man, it's so good to see you, Ron. Let me give you some review before we get started. By the way, I realize that we go over this time and time again, but how many times does it take? Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Bill. 70 times to hear something for it to sink in. Ezra, the author of Chronicles, was born in 480 BC in Babylon. And he came to Jerusalem as a young man with Zerubbabel and his very good friend Nehemiah. So in the Bible, when you have Ezra and Nehemiah, you need to understand that those two guys are good buddies. In fact, Matt and I had an email discussion. Nehemiah claims authorship of the book Nehemiah, but the Jews say Ezra collated it. He put it together as the professional scribe. They came to Jerusalem in 458 BC, and then Ezra either died as a young man or he went back to Babylon to help with a school that Daniel had started called the School of the Wise Men or the School of the Magi. And that School of the Magi is where the three Magi from the East came when the Messiah was born. And I ask people all the time, why did the Magi come from the East when the Messiah was born? They said because they saw a star and they followed it. No, that was the secondary cause. That was the guide. They came because Daniel chapter 11 told the Magi when the Messiah would be born. And they knew the time had come. So they went to Bethlehem to worship the Messiah. This book, Chronicles, as I said, collated by Ezra, is the last book of the Hebrew Bible. Never forget that. In the Hebrew Bible, it's one scroll. We divide it into two, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. In your English Bible, it's like way, way up, about halfway in the Old Testament. Technically, this book, Chronicles, should be at the end of your Old Testament. And you'll see when we come to 2nd Chronicles why. 2nd Chronicles, the whole scroll of Chronicles, ends with one of the greatest prophecies in the Old Testament. And He, the Messiah, shall go up, and ends in mid-sentence in the Hebrew. Go up where? Go up and do what? The answer is, He shall go up to the temple and be presented as the Messiah. So, when the Gospels open, the first story of Jesus after His birth is Him going up to the temple, confounding the Pharisees. Incredible reason for why Chronicles should be the last book of your Old Testament. Now, the reason Ezra, who collated the Old Testament for the Hebrews and put it together, is called the Tanakh. Tanakh. What does Tanakh mean? Torah. In Nevi'im, which means the prophets in Hebrew. And you see the scroll of the prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and so on. And then Kevaim, which is the writings. And so they only had 16 scrolls, and what the Hebrews would do, even in the days of Jesus, they would have these scrolls in a chest or an ark. And when a rabbi, a teacher, would teach in the synagogue, women would be on one side, men would be on the other, and the teacher would sit, and the ark would be brought, and a scroll would be requested, and it would be pulled out and rolled on a table. No chapter divisions, no verses. Nobody could follow along. They had to audibly hear the teacher read. And this is exactly what Yeshua did in His first message in Nazareth. He asked for the scroll of Isaiah, unrolled it, read it, and then got up, went and sat down. All eyes were fastened on Him, and He said, "Today, what I've just read is fulfilled in your hearing," meaning, I am the Messiah. And they're so upset, what do? They want to push Him off a cliff. He's a heretic. By the way, I always love it when people call me a heretic because they call Jesus a heretic, you know. They want to push Him off, but the Bible says He walked right through them because His time had not yet come. Now here's what's fascinating. A lot of the rabbis, when they would teach, like say for instance from the writings, which would include the Psalms, they would read it again and again and again and again, 70 times or more, until the people had it memorized. And then, one of the things they do in the synagogue is a rabbi who was a known teacher who would often come on Shabbat, the Saturday, and teach. And by the way, what else are you going to do on Shabbat? It was a day of rest. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have ball games. You couldn't watch the Knicks. Okay, so you sat in the synagogue sometimes all morning, went and had lunch, came back all afternoon until dark. And so what you would do is you would memorize the Psalms by hearing them read over and over and over again. And the practice of quoting the Psalms would be like this, Coach. The rabbi would say the first few words, and then everyone would quote the rest of the psalm. This is why when Jesus was on the cross and He cried out, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," any Hebrew at the foot of the cross would have automatically continued to quote that psalm. And man, if you go to that psalm where that is found and you continue reading, you realize the cross is victory, not defeat. Okay, so I don't know how we got off on all that, but Chronicles is like a history book. So that when the people who were still, the Jews still living in Babylon, were making their way home after it was being rebuilt by the first wave of settlers. Remember, Judah had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Cyrus, the first king of what country? Cyrus? Persia, known today as Iran. Cyrus defeated the king of Babylon and overtook Babylon on Sunday night, October the 13th, 539 BC. Historians write about it. It's in your Bible, Daniel chapter 5. Cyrus wrote on a scroll, a clay tablet, that all the captives could go home and build a temple to their gods and offer a sacrifice for his family. And so it's called the Cyrus Cylinder. And if you ever go to the British Museum in London, you need to go. You'll walk in, you got to turn to the right to buy your tickets. But the first thing you see is Cyrus's cylinder lit up. And I'm telling you, nobody knows what it is. But you do. And when you go to London, you need to go there and see it. So he released all the Jews and they went home. They walked home. And on their way home, Chronicles was taught. Chronicles was taught because this is the history of the Jews. And of course, as we have seen in our study, we've looked at David and his reign and the key theme of 1 Chronicles, which is all about David. Saul, the first king of the United Kingdom, is not mentioned much except his death, his rebellion and his death. Unlike Samuel and Kings, where Saul's life is conveyed to us, it's glossed over. Probably because Ezra's like, we really don't need to teach our kids, 1,000 years after this happened, the bad stuff about Saul. And so David, he's the one that is taught about in Chronicles. And remember, the key event is when David numbers the soldiers and the men and the chariots and the horses because he wants to put his trust in his army and in their strength rather than Yahweh. And because of that, a pandemic strikes Israel. And David realizes his sin because of a prophet who tells him what he has done. His trust has moved away from Yahweh and on to himself and his army. So David goes out to the highest place in Jerusalem, the threshing floor. The threshing floor where the richest Moabite still lived, a Canaanite. And he goes to that threshing floor and he offers a sacrifice to Yahweh, and the plague stops. This threshing floor of Ornan, we studied it for several weeks, is so important because it was the very spot 200 years earlier where Abraham offered his son as a substitution, and Yahweh stayed his hand, and you have the goat whose horns were caught in the thicket, and that's where the goat was slain. David's tabernacle was built there. We studied David's tabernacle, one of the best studies I've ever had. I mean, it's just incredible. And remember, it's not Moses' tabernacle, it's David's tabernacle, where only the ark was present and there was continuous worship. Sacrifice was 5 miles away. It's the clearest example of new covenant worship in the Old Testament, on that very spot. And on that spot, Solomon builds his temple. By the way, Solomon's name, Shalom, means peace in Hebrew. Shalomon means man of peace. Shalomon builds the temple on that spot. On that spot, Jesus Christ, 1,000 years later, is standing beside Pilate when he is offered as the sacrifice for the world. This is the exact spot, and it's on that spot where Pentecost occurs and 5,000 people are baptized in the cleansing pools of the priests of the temple. I mean, it's the temple. It's the Temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem. What we've seen in our study, that the temple cost about $1 trillion in today's money in the gold and silver that was used to build it. We studied the Tabernacle of David. Now, 2 weeks ago, last time we met, we looked at the musicians. We looked at Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun. And I showed you the instruments that they played. They played the harp, the lyre, and the cymbals. These were the musicians who, when they sang and played their music, they prophesied. They revealed the word of the Lord. And remember, I showed you that there were 288 musicians that were appointed by David to be musicians, not only in the house or tabernacle of David, but later in Solomon or Solomon's temple that he built. And I showed you the significance of that number, which is 144 times 2. We won't go back over, but it's prophesying music. And I said it 2 weeks ago, and I'll say it again. If you ever feel like there's an oppressive spirit in your home, if you ever feel that there's a demonic attack, something that you can't explain, maybe it's a heaviness of depression or bitterness or anger, either in a child or a spouse or whoever, turn harmonic music on. Turn on either classical music or harmonic Christian music. Why? Because throughout the Scriptures, anytime there was an evil spirit that oppressed, musicians came and played, and it drove the evil spirits away. The harmony you hear may very well be the Spirit drawing near. So, I showed you singing and suffering, beauty and brokenness, and rejoicing and redemption. But that's again 2 weeks ago. Now, today, as we read this text, several of you have said, what in the world can you get out of this text? Names, numbers, gates, guards. Well, I'm going to show you. The one thing you need to be clear on, Jacob, his name was changed by Yahweh to what? How many sons did he have? On this screen, you see the 12 sons. But I want to show you something. Look at the third son, Levi. It's shadowed out, and there's not a number beside his name. Look at Joseph. Joseph has no number beside his name. Now, why is that? When Joseph was in Egypt, he had 2 sons born to him, Manasseh and Ephraim. These 2 sons of Joseph took Joseph's place and Levi's place in the distribution of the land of Canaan. Manasseh and Ephraim got land. Joseph didn't. Neither did Levi or his descendants. Here's what they got. They got 48 Levitical cities where they lived throughout the land of Canaan. 48 Levitical cities. We're going to read about one in just a moment in 1 Chronicles 26. And then 6 cities of refuge. 3 on the east side of the Jordan, 3 on the west side of the Jordan. And here's what the Levites did. They were the ministers. They were the servants. They were the guards. They were the judges. They were the musicians. They were the ones who led all of the 12 tribes of Israel, including Manasseh and Ephraim, to an understanding of who Yahweh is and what it meant to worship Him. Okay? The 6 cities of refuge, if you ever accidentally kill someone, like in manslaughter. I recently read in the paper of a young man who killed a 17-year-old girl in a boating accident, and he was prosecuted for manslaughter, and they had to pause the trial because he got so emotional. He was weeping. In the days of the Levites, in the days of Israel, in the days of Ezra, what we're reading in Chronicles, if you kill someone, what would you do? You would run to the city of refuge. You would run as fast as you could, because the family of the one you killed would be chasing you down to kill you. It's called the Avenger of Blood. And that was a cultural thing in the days of the Middle East of the time period we're talking about, 500, 600, 1,000 years before Christ. And here's what you would do. You would look for a refuge road. A refuge road was a road that had no curves and that was straight, built by the Levites, and had no rocks on it. It was smooth, it was straight, and it was signed. On each side of that road was a sign that said Miklat, Miklat, which in Hebrew means refuge. And you would run as fast as you could to the city of refuge. And once you crossed the line of demarcation, the Avengers of Blood had to stop. They couldn't continue. And you stayed in that city of refuge, and you were fed, you were housed, everything you needed was given to you, until what day? When the high priest died, you were released. And by law, the Avengers of Blood could not touch you. That's in the book of Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and so on, and the Levites took care of it. Now, why is that important? Well, that's a beautiful picture of the gospel. The avenger of your blood is the law. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The law is chasing you on your hills, running after you to take your life. What do? You run to refuge. Who is refuge? Jesus Christ is our refuge and our strength. And it is His death that causes the law to stop. Oh man, that's beautiful. All right, here's what you've got to know about Levi before we read our text. Levi had 3 sons. Now this is going to be hard for you to remember. I get it. But man, if you can, hang on to it. The 3rd son of Jacob had 3 sons. Gershon was his oldest. Kohath was his middle son. Merari was his 3rd son. All 3 of these names are going to be in 1 Chronicles 26. And you've got to know what these names represent. Gershon, son of Levi. Kohath, son of Levi. Merari, son of Levi. Now, by the way, Kohath right here, Kohath had a son named Amram. Amram. Anybody know who Amram is? Father of Moses and Aaron. Amram, son of Kohath, married Jochebed, the only named sister of these 3. Jochebed took her and Amram's son Moses, who was born in Egypt, and hid him in the bulrushes. Moses and Aaron fall in this line right here. And as we've already studied, only the descendants of Aaron could be priests. But these 3 families are Levites. The Levites were the ones who were given the 48 cities, the 6 cities of refuge, and who ministered in Jerusalem at the temple. Now today, we're going to read in 1 Chronicles 26 the 5 responsibilities of the Levites, the families of the 3 sons of Levi. Here they are. They were gatekeepers. By the way, I'll send you this slide too. Ronnie, remind me. I'll send it later. They were treasurers. We're going to read about this in verses 20 through 28 of our text. They were officers, meaning judges, over Israel. If there was a disagreement among Israelites or Hebrews, they went to the Levites for adjudication. They were musicians, as we've already studied. And only one specific family were priests, the descendants of Aaron. This is where a lot of Christians get confused. Only the descendants of one family, Aaron, were the priests. All of these other Levites had jobs. gatekeepers, treasurers, officers, musicians. And that's what we're going to read about today. So let's begin reading in 1 Chronicles chapter 26. And before we start reading, does anybody have a comment or a question on what we've said so far? Okay? Let's start reading then. Verse 1. For the divisions of the gatekeepers, there were of the Korahites, Meshelemiah, the son of Kor, of the sons of Asaph. Now right there, you're probably already lost. Okay, so let me just take you back to the three sons of Levi and show you something here. Why does it say Korahites rather than Kohathites? You're going to read in just a moment Merari. I'm going to show you Gershon. But here in verse 1, it doesn't say Kohathites, it says Korites. Why? Well, I guess the best way to put it would be this. The Kohathites, the major family of the Kohathites became the Korites. It's like saying, he's Native American, but then getting more specific. He's Cherokee. To say Kohathites is the descendants of Kohath, but the major family by the days of Ezra were the Korahites. Anybody remember what happened to Korah? Anybody remember? Yes.
He refused to do. I can't remember what he refused to do.
Good, Bill. Numbers chapter 16. Korah, the descendant of Kohath, a son of Kohath, didn't like the fact that Moses and Aaron had been chosen. Remember? And so he comes along and said, wait. All the tribes are holy, which sounds spiritual. But what he means is, we're all set apart by Yahweh. We want the responsibilities you have. So, Moses goes before Yahweh and says, help me out, Yahweh. And he says, have the Korites come tomorrow with censers of fire in their hand and stand beside the sons of Aaron, and I'll show you my will. So they bring the censers like this, and Bill, the earth opens up and all the Korites are swallowed up. Make sense? Okay, and then everybody's like, are you kidding me? Okay, but there's an amazing verse. I think it's verse 23 of number 16. It's off the top of my head. It says, but the sons of the Korites did not perish. Meaning, only their fathers and grandfathers holding the censers. So when you come to the Psalms, there's like 25 Psalms written by the sons of Korah. One of the greatest lessons of redemption that you'll ever find. You might have a grandmother, a grandfather, great-grandfather who went to prison for murder, who was an alcoholic or whatever. But that promise, Bill, the sons of Korah did not perish. Now we come to the gatekeepers are the sons of Korah. These are the ones who are guarding access to Yahweh. Isn't that amazing? God takes the very descendants of the one who rebelled to become his gatekeepers. Let's go on. Here are the descendants of Korah. 2, Meshelemiah and his sons, Zechariah the firstborn, Jediel the second, Zebediah the third, Jathniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Johanan the sixth, Elanoai the seventh, Obed-Edom also had sons. Okay, now we switched. Let me show you something. Let me show you. Where it says Obed-Edom right there, verse 4, the first 3 verses are the sons of Korah. Obed-Edom is the descendant of Gershon. And so what you've got here is in the gatekeepers, there is a division among the three sons of Levi to guard the gates of the temple that Solomon will build. Now, anybody remember who Obed-Edom was?
He's the one who took responsibility of the ark.
Very good. We studied it in 1 Chronicles 13. Remember, they're bringing the ark. David is bringing the ark to Jerusalem, and they're drawing it on a cart, and it begins to fall off, and they reach up to touch it, and then they die, and they stop the train, if you will. And Obed-Edom, who is a Gershonite, who lived in a city, a Levitical city called Gath-Rimmon, which means winepress of the pomegranate, he took the ark, and his sons, 8 of them, it stayed there for 3 months. And the Bible says that the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all that he had because he cared for the ark. Now, this is that Obed-Edom. And we're about to read his sons, 8 of them. Shemaiah, the firstborn. Jehozabad, the second. Joah, the third. Sakhar, the fourth. Nathaniel, the fifth. Amiel, the sixth. Issachar, the seventh. And Peulethai, the eighth. God had indeed blessed him. By the way, do you see that? Underline that. God had indeed blessed him. Now let me show you something really cool. The prophet Samuel probably wrote Samuel. And it was collated later, but it's his diaries, if you will. 1st and 2nd Samuel. So when it says in your text right there, the Lord indeed had blessed him, Ezra is referring to this verse, 2 Samuel 6:11. The Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all that he had. Because remember, Ezra is writing this 500 years after it happened. And he already had the scroll of Samuel. And so when he says, the Lord indeed had blessed Obed-Edom, he's referring to Samuel. Have you ever considered the fact that Ezra was reading portions of the same Bible you're reading? Samuel, the Psalms, and so on. Let's go on. All these, verse 8, were the sons of Obed-Edom. They and their sons and their relatives were able men with strength for service from Obed-Edom. Meshemiah had sons and relatives, valiant men. Also, Hosa, one of the sons of Merari. Now follow me here. In the first 3 verses, you've got the descendants of Kohath. In verses 4 through 9, 9, you've got the descendants of Gershon. Now, we've got the descendants of Merari. These are the 3 sons of Levi. These are the Levites. Hosa, one of the sons of Merari, had sons. Shimri the first, although he was not the firstborn, his father made him first. Okay, what does that mean? The firstborn son would always get a double portion of the inheritance. He was the legacy of the father, but it says right here, he was not the firstborn, but his father made him the firstborn. Does that ring a bell about any other story you know in the Bible? Yep. What? Jacob and Esau. Same thing. So probably what happened is there was either a moral failure or something occurred so that though Shimri was not the firstborn, he was made the firstborn. Now remember, we're going now through the sons of Hosa. Hilkiah the second, Tabaliah the third, Zechariah the fourth. All the sons and relatives of Hosa were 13. To these divisions of gatekeepers, the chief men were given duties, like their relatives, to minister in the house of Yahweh. They cast lots, the small and the great alike, according to their fathers' households, for every gate. The lot to the east fell to Shelemiah. Then they cast lots for his son Zechariah, a counselor with insight, and his lot came out to the north. I'm going to show you a map here in just a second. For Obed-Edom, it fell to the south, To his sons went the storehouse as well. For Shupim and Hosa, it was to the west by the gate of Shalaketh. By the way, Shalaketh means waste gate. I think the modern equivalent, it's still standing today, is the dung gate. This is where people would throw their trash. Very, very near to the valley of Hinnom, from which Jesus took the word Gehinnom, which is translated hell, the waste dump where the worm does not die. Let's go on. Verse 17, on the east there were 6 Levites, on the north 4 daily, on the south 4 daily, and at the storehouse 2 by 2. At the parbar on the west there were 4 at the highway and 2 at the parbar. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers of the sons of Korah and of the sons of Merari. And by the way, Gershon is not mentioned, but that's where Obed-Edom, in my opinion, comes from. Now let me show you this. This is really, really cool. You have basically Meshelemiah, who guards the eastern gate with his boys. Zechariah, who is a grandson. His name means a counselor with insight. He guards the north gate. Obed-Edom, he guards the south gate. And Hosa, he guards the west gate. Here's their names. Meshelemiah, strength. This is where all the people came in the east. Strength. Wisdom. Zechariah, that's the meaning of his name. This is where all the enemies came in from the north. Obed-Edom, faithfulness. That's the meaning of his name. He guarded the storehouses, the treasuries, the south entrance. And then Hosa, his name means service. And he watched over the Shalaketh gate, which was the dung gate. Now, let's see if we can't find a picture of it. Here's a good picture. You're like, from Ezra's day until the days of Jesus Christ, the descendants of Zechariah guarded the north gate. The descendants of Obed-Edom guarded the south gate. The descendants of Meshelemiah that we just read about guarded the east gate. And the descendants of Hosa guarded the west gate. And their job was to do what Ezra records. All right, let's go on. Verse 20. Here's the second job. It's the treasury. The Levites, their relatives, had charge of the treasuries of the house of God and the treasuries of the dedicated gifts. The sons of Ladan, the sons of the Gershonites, see, there's the Gershonites right there. Just remember, Gershonite, the oldest son of Levi, belonging to Ladan, namely the Jehalelites, were the heads of the father's household, belonging to Ladan the Gershonite. The sons of Jahili, Zetham, and Joel his brother had charge of the treasuries of the house of Yahweh. As for the Amramites, the Israelites, the Hebronites, and the Uzalites, these are the descendants of Gershon. Shebuel, the son of Gershon, the son of Moses, was officer over the treasuries. His relatives by Eliezer were Rehabiah his son, Jeshiah his son, Joram his son, Zichri his son, and Shalomoth his son. This Shalomoth and his relatives had charge of all the treasuries of the dedicated gifts which King David and the heads of the fathers' households, the commanders of thousands and hundreds, and the commanders of the army had dedicated. They dedicated part of the spoil won in battles to repair the house of Yahweh. And all that Samuel the seer had dedicated, and Saul the son of Kish, Abner the son of Ner, and Joab the son of Zeruiah, everyone who had dedicated anything, all of this was in the care of Shelomoth and his relatives. Now let me pause right here. Why is Ezra going through all this when it's David 500 years earlier and who David appointed to guard? Because as the Jews were coming back from Babylon and as Zerubbabel was rebuilding the temple, they are now dividing responsibilities among the descendants of these that David appointed. And so let's say you're traveling home and you're the descendant of Shemaliah, and you're hearing this, and you know what your duties are when you get home. You are to guard the gates of the rebuilt temple that Zerubbabel is rebuilding. Now let's go on, we'll finish, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Verse 29. As for the Israelites, Shaniah and his sons were assigned to outside duties for Israel as officers and judges. As for the Hebronites, Hashabiah and his relatives, 1,700 capable men, had charge of the affairs of Israel west of the Jordan, for all the work of Yahweh and the service of his king. As for the Hebronites, by the way, the Hebronites, they're descendants of Kohath. Jeradai, the chief, these Hebronites were investigated according to their genealogies and fathers' households in the 40th year of David's reign, and men of outstanding capability were found among them at Jazer of Gilead. And his relatives, capable men, were 2,700 in number, heads of fathers' households, and King David made them overseers. By the way, this is the word for judges in Hebrew. Of the Reubenites, the Gadites, half the tribe of Manassites, concerning all the affairs of God and of the king. From verse 29 through the end of the chapter, these are the judges. From verse 20 through verse 28, those were the treasurers. And the first few verses, verse 1 through verse 19, those were the guards of the gate. Now, let me show you some concluding thoughts, and then let's open it up for discussion. Remember, I want you to hang on to this. There are 5 major responsibilities of the Levites: gatekeepers, treasurers, judges, musicians, and priests. Only the sons of Aaron were priests. So, when you use the term Levite, you've got to recognize that priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. Only the sons of Aaron were priests. So what did you do as a Levite? You lived in one of the 48 fortified cities of the Levites, or one of the 6 cities of refuge, and you would come to Jerusalem to minister at the temple. During the days when feasts were not being celebrated in Jerusalem, you left for a week some Levites to guard the gates, to guard the treasuries, to be musicians. But during the 3 major festivals, Passover in the spring, Pentecost in the summer, Tabernacles in the fall, all the Levites came to Jerusalem to minister to the people. This is important for you to remember. So David appointed 288 Levitical musicians, and he appointed 93 gatekeepers to protect what was sacred. Now, in closing, here is the point. God honors faithfulness more than visibility. Your job may not be to be a teacher. Your job may not be to be on television. Your job may not be to write superb books with your name on the cover. Beautiful cover, James, by the way. Your job may not be any job that people ever know. But God honors faithfulness more than visibility. Have you ever considered the fact that these men that we just read guarded gates, and very few people ever talk about them? I mean, did you even know who Shemaliah was? Did you even know who these men were? Hosa, did you know him? His responsibilities? God's greatest blessings often flow through simple obedience. Think about this. Rather than worrying about how much people know about what you do for the Lord, always remember people like Hosa and Shemaliah. You didn't even know their names, and you believe in the Scriptures, but nobody studies this. God honors your faithful obedience. That's it. Just be faithful. And it just may be you're caring for your mom or your dad. You're the gatekeeper of their house, the guard. That's enough. And every believer has a ministry. Every believer has a ministry. So, all right, we've got about 10 minutes before we go. This is one of those chapters, I promise you, when you come to it and read through the Bible in 1 year, you're like, no. Okay, let's get to the next chapter. I get that. But this is, I believe, a really stunning chapter of the order of the gatekeepers, the treasurers, and the judges in the days of David that were to continue in the days of Zerubbabel when Ezra was bringing back the Jews. Questions, comments?
Is there any relevance to the number of guards on the gate?
I ask about that. I ask about the number 93. There's really not on the number 93 that I can think of, but I looked and I couldn't find it. If there is, by the way, it'll sure win you the grand prize for Bible trivia. How many guards were appointed to guard the gates in 1 Chronicles 26? Nobody knows, but it's 93. And I couldn't find significance. There were. It depended on the size of the gate. For instance, Hosa, who had Shechem Gate, which was the dung gate, yeah, it varied. The eastern gate had more because more people came through. The northern gate of wisdom, where the enemy would always attack, yeah, you're right. There were different numbers because of that. So, great question. Jerry?
Treasurers,
Yeah.
were they like accountants or?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were accountants.
They just took care of
Yeah,
it?
they took care of the money. And by the way, there's an interesting story. I believe it is in 2 Kings. Jehoiakim, king of Judah, this is before the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. He received messengers from Babylon. And it says very specifically, he was very proud of the amount of gold and silver in the treasury of the temple. So he opens up the treasury and shows them all that he has. And of course, it leads to the downfall. Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes everything. Okay? So, what's the lesson? Never show anyone the gold and silver in your safe. Okay? Keep it hidden. Yeah. No, that's a problem. Yeah. Great question, Jerry. Yeah, Mark?
I noticed that in the gatekeepers,
Yeah.
between the guards,
Yeah.
there's only one name of the musicians that's also mentioned here, Asaph.
Yeah. And let me say to you, Mark, that has caused controversy throughout because you're referring to verse 1 where Asaph is mentioned, okay? Now, Asaph was a Gershonite, okay? But verse 1 is dealing with the Kohathites, the Kohathites. Make sense? Okay, so watch. It's a different Asaph. It's not the musician. It's a different one. Go ahead.
Could be, because if you notice, it's like in verse 1, for the surface, some of the sons of Asaph.
Yeah.
So some of the other ones were from guards.
Yeah, possibly so, Mark, but go back and look this up. Because what you'll find in verse 1, it's a genealogy. It'd be like me saying, and Wade, the son of Paul, the son of Reed, and so on. It's a line. And that line is Kohath. And the Asaph that we studied in the previous chapter is a Gershonite. He's not a Kohathite. So it's caused great controversy. And John Gill just simply says it's a different Asaph. And by the way, if you take the lineage of the Kohathites out of Chronicles and so on, there's a guy, a Kohathite, and his name is Beneiasaph. Beneiasaph. And what I believe is that Ezra takes the last portion of his name and says Asaph. And this is the different Asaph. That's what my footnote says. Oh, that's what your footnote says? Amazing. I just did that off the top of my head, so that's not bad. Footnotes are not inspired, just like anything off the top of my head is not inspired either. Great question. Anybody else have a comment or a thought? Pastor.
We're talking about what the Levites inherited, the cities of refuge.
Yes.
But they also inherited all the tithes of Israel.
Excellent.
Number
Excellent.
18, I give to the Levites all the tithes of Israel of their inheritance, for the treasures were taking care of not only what had been accumulated, but what was continuing to come in.
Great word, Pastor.
And then
Yeah.
second, the Levites were to tithe to Aaron the priest, to the priest. So your
Yes.
slide up there,
Excellent.
the one that is the
Yes.
treasurer,
Yes.
give his tithe to the one who is the priest.
Yes. Love
Love
it.
And that is to take care of the temple and all the things of the temple.
By the way, he's spot on. And the reason you tithe to the Levites, well, technically you're tithing to the Lord, but you're giving it to the Levites. Then the Levites, the treasurers, were to give it to Aaron and the priest, is because they didn't farm. They didn't have a crop. They didn't have a way to make a living. By the way, you guys know my heart on this, and I don't condemn people who teach differently than I do. But one of the ways I feel you can know whether or not a church is leaning more toward old covenant worship is it's all about bring your tithes into the storehouse, tithe to the Lord, to us, the ministers. We'll give a tithe to missions, which I'm not opposed to, 10%, okay? But it's all structured like that. Whereas my view of new covenant giving is that it's all the Lord's. And you give where the Spirit leads you, including to those people who serve you and teach you the Word of God and so on. Now, but, Jerry, what I've discovered is this. I've taught New Covenant theology for so long. I am way out of touch with the SBC. Way out of touch. The SBC is more Old Covenant. So my belief that women, gifted women, can lead according to their humility and their giftedness, that's just, to me, that's so natural, it's like breathing. But I don't see anyone having authority over anyone else in the body of Christ. I am out of touch, because the SBC tends to be more Levitical in its structure. That's a confession I'm making. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm wrong at all. I'm just saying I'm different. Okay, I'm different. But Pastor makes a good point. Pastor makes a good point of how they did in the Old Covenant. Somebody else, comment or question. How many sons of Levi? That's Jacob, 12. How many sons of Levi? 3. And just remember, Gershon is the oldest, Kohath is the middle, Moses and Aaron come from Kohath. By the way, so does Korah. Korah's a cousin to Moses and to Aaron. And Korah's the one that dies, but then his descendants they blossom. And so another name for the Kohathites became the Korahites. And that's right there in 1 Chronicles 26. And they wrote many Psalms. And then the last son is Merari. And so watch, every position of the 5, judges, treasurers, gatekeepers, musicians, all the way through are divided between the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites. Divided all the way through. Last question, back here. Anybody have a question? Okay. Comment.
In the beginning, you said that the first 5 books was basically history. Actually, the whole book is history.
Right.
And what one person tried to do, and too bad it didn't get done, was to teach it in school. Because it's our history.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the downfall of a country when you don't teach history to the kids. Now, next week, Commanders of the Army, 1 Chronicles chapter 27. God bless you all for watching. we'll see. Yes?
All this time passed since King James made it. Has anyone made a truly chronological Bible?
Okay, okay, Bill, we're still on? Okay, here's the question. Has anyone, since all the time has passed, truly made a chronological Bible? And let me say this. Yes. And I've written a great foreword for one. I forgot which one. They asked me 15 years ago. But my wife just told me the other day, she is studying the Scripture this year and reading through her chronological Bible. And she absolutely loves it. Because what happens is, as you read through the Bible chronologically, it will go from 1 Chronicles to the Psalms, you'll know when David was attacked and which psalm he writes when he's attacked. And so it's put all together chronologically. So I would highly, highly recommend you get for yourself, for Christmas or a birthday, a chronological Bible. God bless you. We'll see you next week.